Imagine finding an old dollar coin in a drawer you haven't opened in years. It is small, golden colored, slightly worn, and at first glance, it looks like nothing more than an ordinary piece of American pocket change. Then you turn it over, notice the date, see the tiny letter D, and suddenly the coin feels different. Not because every 2000 D or 2001 D Sacagawea dollar is secretly worth a fortune, they are not, but because these were the very first years of a coin that introduced a completely new design to everyday Americans and became one of the most recognizable modern US dollar coins. This is the story of the Sacagawea dollar. And if you have a 2000 D or a 2001 D sitting somewhere in a jar, a drawer, an old collection, or even loose change, there are a few details worth checking before you put it back. The story begins around the end of the 1990s, when the United States was preparing to introduce a new small-sized dollar coin. The Susan B. Anthony dollar had already shown that simply changing the appearance of a dollar coin did not guarantee that Americans would actually use it regularly. The mint wanted something different, something distinctive, something that could stand apart from quarters and other circulating coins. The answer became the Sacagawea dollar, featuring Sacagawea on the obverse and a soaring eagle on the reverse. The design was intended to give the new dollar a strong visual identity, and the unusual golden color made it immediately recognizable. But there is something important to understand about that color. This is not a gold coin in the traditional precious metal sense. The coin is made from a copper core surrounded by manganese brass outer layers, which gives it that warm, golden appearance. So if somebody tells you that an ordinary 2000 D Sacagawea dollar contains valuable gold simply because it looks golden, that is a misunderstanding. The real collecting story is much more interesting. The letter D tells us the coin was struck at the Denver Mint, and that small mint mark can become an important part of identifying exactly what you have. Now think about the timing. The year 2000 was the beginning. Millions of Americans were suddenly seeing a completely unfamiliar dollar coin. The country was entering a new millennium. Technology was changing rapidly, and the Mint was introducing a coin designed to look unmistakably modern while still connecting itself to American history. Sacagawea herself was a historical figure associated with the Lewis and Clark expedition, and the choice of her portrait made the coin more than just another denomination. It gave the dollar a story. But here's where collectors have to slow down, because the date alone does not determine whether a coin is valuable. A normal circulated 2000 D Sacagawea dollar can be worth only around its face value, while coins in particularly high grades, certain varieties, unusual errors, or special finishes can command much stronger collector interest. The same basic principle applies to 2001 D pieces. Condition matters. Certification can matter. Variety matters. And most importantly, authenticity matters. This is where the hobby becomes fascinating, because two coins that look almost identical to a casual observer can have very different collector appeal. Picture a typical American household in the early 2000s. Someone gets a Sacagawea dollar as change. Maybe they put it in a desk drawer because it looks unusual. Maybe a child finds one and decides it must be important because it looks different from the other coins. Years pass. The drawer gets cleaned out. The coin ends up in a small box with old buttons, foreign coins, baseball cards, and a handful of pennies. Then one afternoon, someone notices the date 2000. That moment is exactly why coin collecting continues to attract people. The excitement isn't necessarily about discovering a fortune. It is about realizing that an object you've ignored for years has a history attached to it. Now look closely at the 2000 D. The obverse shows Sacagawea, and the reverse originally featured a soaring eagle surrounded by stars. The design was created to be distinctive, and the edge is plain rather than reeded like a typical quarter. That difference alone can help you recognize the denomination. On the obverse, the date and mint mark are positioned in a way that makes identification fairly straightforward, but collectors know that the interesting details often appear when you examine the coin under good lighting and magnification. You might notice small differences in lettering, the sharpness of the strike, surface marks, or signs of an unusual die variety. And this is where one of the lesser-known facts about the series becomes especially interesting. Not every unusual-looking Sacagawea dollar is automatically a rare variety. A scratch is not an error. A stain is not a mint mistake. A strange color is not proof of a rare composition. Coin collecting rewards patience because the first impression can be misleading. One of the biggest mistakes a new collector can make is seeing a dramatic-looking coin online and assuming that every similar coin must have the same value. The market does not work that way. Condition, rarity, demand, and verification all come together. A coin with heavy circulation may have very limited premium value, while a sharply preserved example with strong eye appeal can attract collectors who are specifically building high-grade sets. Professional grading can become important when a coin appears to be especially valuable. But grading itself does not magically make an ordinary coin rare. It simply provides an independent assessment of authenticity and condition. And that distinction is important if you are searching through your own collection. If you find a 2000D or 2001D Sacagawea dollar, start with the simplest questions. Is the date correct? Is the mint mark actually D? Is the coin genuine? Has it been heavily circulated? Does it show anything that looks like a genuine mint-made error rather than ordinary damage? Is there a recognized variety that matches what you are seeing? Those questions are much more useful than simply asking, how much is this worth? Because the honest answer is that most examples are not jackpot coins. But that doesn't make them boring. In fact, the ordinary examples help tell the story of how the series entered American commerce. The 2000 issue is especially significant because it represents the beginning of the Sacagawea dollar era. The 2001 issue follows immediately behind it, giving collectors two early dates that naturally attract attention when assembling a set. And there is another reason these early coins are interesting. The Sacagawea dollar did not become the everyday success story the mint originally hoped for. Americans continued to favor paper $1 notes, and the coin often ended up being saved, returned to banks, or used in limited settings rather than becoming a dominant part of daily commerce. That creates an unusual collecting situation. The coin was produced for circulation, but many people quickly treated it as something special simply because it looked different. Imagine a cashier in 2000 handing a customer a brand new golden dollar. The customer looks at it, turns it over, and asks, "What is this?" That reaction happened repeatedly across the country. For collectors today, those first impressions are part of the coin's history. The Sacagawea dollar also helped establish a design approach that would continue evolving. Later versions of the series changed the reverse design as part of the Native American $1 coin program, while keeping Sacagawea on the obverse. So when you hold a 2000D or 2001D, you are not simply holding an old dollar. You are holding the opening chapter of a design series that continued for decades. Now let's talk about value, because this is where responsible coin collecting matters most. You will sometimes hear dramatic claims that a particular early Sacagawea dollar is worth thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars. Occasionally, exceptional coins, major recognized errors, or top-grade examples can bring significant prices, but those cases should never be presented as the normal value of every coin with the same date and mint mark. Auction results can also vary depending on grade, certification, rarity, timing, and buyer demand. A coin's advertised asking price online is not the same thing as a confirmed selling price. If you're researching one of your own coins, compare it with documented sales, reputable price guides, rather than relying on a single sensational listing. That approach can save you from both disappointment and unnecessary spending. And if your coin appears to have a genuine mint error, don't clean it. This is one of the simplest pieces of advice in the hobby. Cleaning can damage the original surface and potentially reduce collector appeal. Hold the coin by its edges. Use good lighting, and if necessary, compare it with a known normal example. A magnifying glass can reveal details, but it can also tempt you into seeing things that are not really there. So always verify unusual features carefully. Think back to that imaginary drawer from the beginning. You pull out the coin again. The date says 2000. The tiny D is there. The surface has a few marks, but nothing obviously unusual. Maybe you've just discovered a valuable rarity, or maybe you've discovered something even more important for a collector, the beginning of a major American coin story. That is the part of coin collecting that is easy to forget when the internet is filled with enormous price claims. A coin doesn't have to be worth thousands of dollars to be worth examining. Sometimes the real value is historical. Sometimes it is educational. Sometimes it is the satisfaction of finding something that millions of people once handled without giving it a second thought. And sometimes, yes, a truly unusual coin can surprise you. But the difference between a normal coin and an extraordinary one comes from the evidence, not the excitement. So if you have a 2000D or 2001D Sacagawea dollar, take another look tonight. Check the date. Check the D. Look at the surfaces. Look for genuine mint-made characteristics rather than scratches or damage. Compare the coin with reliable references. And if something genuinely unusual stands out, consider having it examined by an experienced numismatist or reputable grading service. You might discover a premium example, or you might simply discover that the coin in your hand is an authentic piece of the beginning of a fascinating American coin series. Either way, you have learned something that was sitting quietly in your pocket all along. And that, honestly, is why I love this hobby. At HF Coins World, we're not just chasing big numbers, we're chasing the stories hidden inside ordinary American coins. So before you spend that old dollar, throw it into a jar, turn it over and take a closer look. You never know what detail might make you stop and wonder. If you enjoyed this journey through the 2000D and 2001D Sacagawea dollars, subscribe to HF Coins World and keep checking your change. The next interesting coin might already be sitting in your hand. First 2000_D Sacagawea dollar. There are some coins that become interesting because they are extremely rare. And then there are coins that become interesting because they mark the beginning of something much bigger. The 2000D Sacagawea Golden Dollar belongs to that second category. And if you have one sitting in a drawer, a coin jar, an old collection, or even mixed in with other dollar coins, it deserves a closer look, not because every 2000D Sacagawea dollar is secretly worth thousands of dollars, because that simply would not be true, but because the year 2000 was the beginning of an entirely new chapter in modern American coinage. Think about that for a moment. 26 years ago, the United States introduced a dollar coin with a completely new look, a distinctive golden color, a new portrait, and a design that was meant to make Americans notice the smallest denomination of paper money in a different way. And today, the same coin can still be found for relatively modest prices in ordinary condition. While exceptional examples, special finishes, unusual errors, and certain varieties can command much more attention from collectors. That difference is exactly where the story gets interesting. Welcome back to HF Coins World, where we look beyond the surface of American coins and try to understand what actually makes one piece more desirable than another. The coin we are examining today is the 2000D United States Sacagawea Golden Dollar, the Denver minted version of the first-year Sacagawea dollar. Before we talk about value, though, put yourself in the year 2000. The country was entering a new millennium. Technology was changing quickly. People were talking about the future, and the United States Mint was preparing to introduce a dollar coin that looked unlike the familiar silver-colored dollars Americans had seen before. The new coin was smaller than the Eisenhower dollar, similar in diameter to the Susan B. Anthony dollar, but visually very different because of its golden appearance. That golden color was not solid gold. The coin is made from a copper core with a manganese brass outer layer, giving it the warm golden appearance that made the new dollar immediately recognizable. And there was another important detail. The coin had a plain edge with lettering rather than a traditional reeded edge, a feature that would become an important part of the series. On the obverse was Sacagawea, the Shoshone woman remembered for her role during the Lewis and Clark expedition, carrying her infant son, Jean-Baptiste, commonly known as Pomp. The design was created by sculptor Glenna Goodacre, while the reverse originally showed a soaring eagle surrounded by stars, a design associated with sculptor Thomas D. Rogers Sr., the United States Mint, wasn't simply producing another dollar. It was trying to create a coin that would have an identity of its own. And that is why the 2000 date matters so much. It is the first year of the series. When collectors build a complete Sacagawea dollar collection, 2000 is where the story begins. But here's where we need to separate history from hype, because online coin videos sometimes make it sound as though every first-year coin is automatically a treasure. It isn't. A normal circulated 2000D Sacagawea dollar can be worth around its face value, and even many uncirculated examples are not enormously expensive. The real difference comes from condition, strike quality, surface preservation, certification, special issues, and genuine varieties or errors. According to the current PCGS price guide, ordinary 2000D examples are listed at relatively modest levels through much of the mint state range, while higher grade pieces can become substantially more valuable. That is an important lesson for anyone searching through coins. The date alone is not enough. The mint mark alone is not enough. A coin needs the right combination of characteristics before the market treats it as something special. Now look closely at the small letter on your coin. If you see a D beneath the date area, you're looking at a Denver Mint issue. That tiny D is easy to overlook, but it tells you where the coin was produced. A 2000D is different from a 2000P Philadelphia issue, and that distinction becomes especially important when we start talking about famous varieties from the first year. One of the most talked about 2000 Sacagawea dollars is the so-called Cheerios dollar. But there is a critical detail that collectors need to understand. The famous Cheerios variety is associated with 2000p coins, not ordinary 2000D circulation strikes. During the promotion surrounding the launch of the new dollar, selected coins were placed in Cheerio cereal boxes, and some of those pieces turned out to have a prototype-style reverse with stronger feather details. PCGS currently lists the 2000p Cheerios prototype reverse as a major variety, with values dramatically higher than an ordinary 2000D. So, Sacagawea Dollar with a certain eagle feature is automatically a Cheerios dollar worth thousands. Slow down and verify the coin. This is exactly how collectors avoid mistakes. Another famous first-year variety is the 2000p Wounded Eagle, a coin with a distinctive die gouge or raised line crossing the eagle's breast area. Again, that variety is associated with Philadelphia, not the standard 2000D issue. PCGS currently lists the 2000p Wounded Eagle separately from the ordinary 2000D coin. That distinction may sound small, but in coin collecting, small distinctions can completely change the identity of a coin. Now imagine a realistic discovery. You're cleaning out an old box, not cleaning the coin itself, because aggressive cleaning can damage collectible surfaces, and you find a handful of dollar coins. Most are later Sacagawea or Native American dollars. Then one catches your eye. It has that unmistakable golden color, and the date says 2000. You turn it over, the eagle is staring back at you. You look around the rim. Then you notice the D. Suddenly, the ordinary dollar in your hand feels different. You reach for a magnifying glass. The surfaces aren't perfect. There are tiny marks from circulation. The color isn't as bright as a freshly preserved mint state coin, but the coin is still attractive. At this point, the smartest thing to do isn't to jump online and assume you've discovered a fortune. The smartest thing is to ask a few basic questions. Is it really dated 2000? Is the mint mark D? Is the coin genuine? Has it been cleaned or damaged? Does it show a recognized variety or an actual mint error? And most importantly, what condition is it in? Those questions are much more useful than simply asking, how much is my coin worth? Because coin value is not one fixed number. It is a range influenced by the marketplace, grade, eye appeal, rarity, and buyer demand. This is where collector psychology becomes fascinating. A collector may look at a 2000D dollar and see a common first-year coin. Another collector may see an unusually well-preserved example with strong surfaces and excellent eye appeal. A third collector may be building a complete set and needs exactly that date and mint mark. The coin hasn't changed, but the context has. That's one of the reasons coin collecting remains so interesting. Value isn't just about metal. It is also about history, condition, scarcity, and the desire to complete a collection. The 2000D Sacagawea Dollar is particularly interesting because the series itself has a complicated history. The original reverse with the eagle was used from 2000 through 2008, and beginning in 2009, the reverse design changed to honor important contributions and achievements of Native Americans. PCGS describes the series as beginning in 2000 and notes that the reverse changed beginning in 2009. That means a 2000D isn't just another dollar from a long-running design. It belongs to the opening year of a design era. There is also an interesting connection between the 2000D Sacagawea Dollar and the United States Mint's Millennium set. Special 2000D Sacagawea Dollars from the Millennium set can have a different presentation and finish, and PCGS separately catalogs those pieces. This is another reason not to lump every coin together simply because the date and mint mark look identical. Two coins can both say 2000D, yet their production history and collectible status can be different. And this brings us to one of the most important lessons for anyone watching. From the United States, condition matters far more than many beginners realize. Imagine two 2000D Sacagawea dollars sitting side by side. The first spent years in circulation, moving through pockets, vending machines, cash drawers, and storage containers. Its high points have small marks. Its fields may have scratches, and its golden finish has lost some of its original freshness. The second was protected almost immediately after production. It has clean surfaces, strong luster, sharp details, and minimal contact marks. Both coins are technically the same date and mint. Yet the collector market can treat them very differently. Professional grading services use numerical grades to describe the condition of coins, and the highest grades are reserved for pieces with exceptional preservation. The PCGS price guide currently shows ordinary 2000D Sacagawea dollars increasing in listed value as the grade rises, with especially strong premiums appearing at the highest levels. But here's something viewers should remember. A price guide number is not a guarantee that your individual coin will sell for that amount. Actual transactions can vary, and the difference between an estimated guide value and a completed sale can be significant. For example, PCGS records an auction sale of a 2000D Sacagawea graded MS67 at $22 in 2019, while another 2000D graded MS68 place sold for $65 at a 2025 Stack's Bowers auction. Those examples show something important. Even within the same date and mint mark, grade and finish can influence the market considerably. And notice what we are not saying. We are not saying that your ordinary 200D coin is automatically worth $65, $400, $1,000, or some giant headline number. We are saying that exceptional certified examples can bring more than ordinary pieces, and the actual market needs to be checked rather than guessed. That is a much healthier way to approach coin collecting. Now let's talk about the coin itself. The obverse is one of the most recognizable modern American dollar designs. Sacagawea faces forward with her infant son positioned behind her. The details are small, so when you're examining the coin, don't use a harsh cleaning method or try to polish it to make the design shine. Collectors generally prefer original surfaces, and polishing can leave permanent marks that reduce desirability. Instead, handle the coin carefully by its edges and use good lighting. A simple magnifier can help you examine the date, mint mark, lettering, fields, and design details without altering the coin. Turn it over and study the eagle. Look for the overall quality of the strike, the feathers, the stars, and the surfaces. But don't immediately declare something an error just because a feature looks unusual. Real mint errors and recognized varieties need to be distinguished from ordinary die characteristics. Damage after leaving the mint, scratches, dents, discoloration, and wear. That's another area where new collectors can save themselves a lot of confusion. A scratch made after the coin left the mint is not the same thing as a striking error. A weakly struck detail is not automatically a rare variety. A dark spot isn't automatically evidence of a special composition. And a coin that looks different under one light isn't necessarily an error. The more you learn, the better you become at separating genuine numismatic interest from ordinary damage. There is another surprising piece of the Sacagawea story that many casual observers miss. The dollar was deliberately designed to have a distinctive golden appearance without being made of gold. That means the coin's color itself can create a psychological illusion of value. People see golden dollar and sometimes assume the coin contains precious gold. It doesn't. The coin's composition is copper with a manganese brass outer layer, and its golden appearance comes from that alloy structure. So if someone tells you that an ordinary 2000D Sacagawea dollar is valuable because it contains gold, that's incorrect. The collectible value, when there is a premium, comes from numismatic factors, not a pile of gold hidden inside the coin. This is an excellent example of why knowing the history behind a coin is just as important as knowing the price. Now consider the American market. Why do collectors continue to care about these coins more than 2 decades after their introduction? Part of the answer is accessibility. The Sacagawea series is modern enough that collectors can still encounter examples without needing to search through 19th century archives or spend huge amounts of money. Another part is design. The warm golden appearance is visually different from most American circulating coins, and that makes the series appealing to people who collect by type, by date, by mint mark, or simply by design. Then there is the first-year factor. Whenever a coin series begins, collectors naturally want an example from the opening year. The 2000 date, therefore, has a permanent place in a complete collection. And because the series continued into the Native American dollar program, the first year Sacagawea dollar can serve as the starting point for a much larger collection. This is why the coin can be interesting even when the individual piece isn't rare. Collecting isn't always about finding a coin worth a fortune. Sometimes the real reward is discovering where a series began. Think about how many hands a normal 2000D dollar may have passed through. It could have been spent by someone who barely noticed it. It could have sat inside a vending machine. It could have been saved by a child who liked the unusual color. It could have been placed in a drawer and forgotten for 20 years. Then one day, someone pulls it out and wonders what it is. That moment is the heart of coin collecting. The coin suddenly becomes a doorway into history. And that is why the best coin discoveries aren't always the ones with the biggest price tags. Sometimes they're the ones that make you curious enough to learn. Now, if you're holding a 2000D Sacagawea dollar while listening to this, here's how I would think about it. First, confirm the date and mint mark. Second, inspect the surfaces under good light. Third, look at the edge and make sure the coin hasn't been heavily damaged or altered. Fourth, compare the design to trusted references if you think you see something unusual. And fifth, if the coin appears genuinely exceptional or shows a potentially significant error or variety. Consider getting a professional opinion before spending money on expensive grading. Not every coin needs certification. In fact, for an ordinary circulated example, professional grading may cost more than the coin's market value. Certification makes more sense when there is a reasonable possibility that the coin's condition, rarity, or variety justifies the expense. This is one of the biggest mistakes beginners make. They see a high auction result for a spectacular coin and assume their similar looking piece deserves the same treatment. But the difference between a normal coin and a top-grade example can be enormous. The difference between a genuine, recognized variety and a damaged coin can be enormous too. So keep your expectations realistic. A normal 2000D is generally not a jackpot coin. Current PCGS guide data places many ordinary examples in the low dollar range depending on grade, while very high-grade examples can carry significantly higher listed values. That is the honest picture. The coin is collectible, historically important as a first-year issue, and potentially more valuable when it has exceptional preservation or recognized special status. But there is no responsible way to promise a huge payout from an ordinary example. And honestly, that makes the story more interesting, not less. Because now you're looking for something real. You're not hunting for a fantasy number. You're looking for evidence. You're learning to recognize quality. You're learning how the mint works. You're learning how collectors think. You're learning why one coin gets placed into a collection, while another gets spent at face value. That is the real skill behind successful coin hunting. Here's another little thought experiment. Imagine someone gives you a jar containing 100 random modern coins. You could dump them on a table and immediately search for the oldest looking piece. But a knowledgeable collector might approach the pile differently. They would scan dates, mint marks, unusual designs, condition, and possible varieties. They would know that a coin doesn't need to look ancient to be collectible. The 2000D Sacagawea Dollar is a perfect example. It is modern, familiar, and still relatively accessible. Yet it represents the beginning of a major American dollar series and has a deep collecting history of its own. Some first-year pieces have special status. Some have unusual finishes, and some extraordinarily preserved examples have brought stronger prices. The PCGS registry specifically includes 2000D Millennium set pieces among the notable varieties and presentations of the series. So the next time you see one, don't just ask, "Is this worth money?" Ask a better question. What exactly am I looking at? That single question can change the way you collect. Maybe it's a normal circulated dollar worth close to face value. Maybe it's an attractive uncirculated coin. Maybe it has a special finish. Maybe there's an unusual feature worth researching. Or maybe the coin simply becomes the first piece in a collection that grows for years. All of those outcomes are legitimate. And if you are building a complete set, the 2000D can be one of those satisfying early pieces that gives the collection a starting point. You can later compare it with 2000P, then move through the early years, study the changing reverse designs, and eventually explore the Native American dollar series. The deeper you go, the more you discover that American coinage is not just a collection of numbers and prices. It is a record of design, culture, technology, politics, art, manufacturing, and everyday life. Even the choice of Sacagawea. For the R-verse carries a story about how the United States chose to represent an important historical figure on a circulating coin. The coin's golden appearance was intended to distinguish it visually, while the size and weight were designed to make it practical. Yet, despite the effort behind the launch, the Sacagawea dollar never became as common in everyday American transactions as its creators might have hoped. That itself is part of the coin's story. A coin can be historically important without becoming an everyday favorite. It can be widely produced without being rare. It can be common in circulated condition, but difficult to find in exceptional grades. Those distinctions are what make numismatics so much more interesting than simply reading a price list. And there is one final warning worth remembering. Whenever you see sensational claims about a 2000D Sacagawea dollar online, and there is one final warning worth remembering whenever you see sensational claims about a 2000D Sacagawea dollar online. Don't confuse the existence of a very expensive Sacagawea variety with the value of every Sacagawea dollar from the same year. The famous 2000P mule, for example, is an extraordinary and entirely different coin involving a Sacagawea dollar paired with a state quarter obverse. PCGS currently lists extremely high values for certified examples of that major error. That coin is not a normal 2010 Sacagawea Dollar. This distinction matters because viral headlines often remove the detail that make a rare coin rare. A viewer sees 2,000 Sacagawea Dollar worth hundreds of thousands and assumes the date is the magic ingredient. It isn't. The extraordinary value comes from the extraordinary error. That's the difference between responsible coin education and misleading hype. So if your coin is a standard 2000D, enjoy it for what it is. If it is circulated, it may be worth little more than its face value. If it's in strong, uncirculated condition, it may attract a premium. If it appears to be an unusual finish, error, or recognized variety, then further research may be worthwhile. And if you're ever lucky enough to find something genuinely unusual, document it carefully, avoid cleaning it, and seek an informed evaluation. The best discoveries are the ones you can prove. After all, anyone can post a giant number on a thumbnail. A real collector wants the evidence behind the number. That is the mindset I want you to take away from this 2000D Sacagawea Golden Dollar. Don't look at a coin and immediately ask how rich it could make you. Look at it and ask what story it is carrying. Ask where it was made. Ask why it was designed that way. Ask whether it has survived unusually well. Ask whether the unusual feature you're seeing is actually a recognized variety or simply damage. And then only after those questions are answered, ask what the market says. That's how you turn a random coin into a real collecting discovery. So before you close this video, take one more look through your own collection. Check the old dollar coins you've put aside. Look for 2000, look for the D mint mark. Examine the condition. Compare what you see with reliable references. And remember that the most valuable thing you can develop as a collector isn't a lucky guess, it's knowledge. If this 2000D Sacagawea Dollar story gave you a new reason to inspect the coins around you, subscribe to HF Coins World because there are countless American coins carrying stories that most people walk right past every day. And if you find a 2000D Sacagawea Dollar in your own collection, don't immediately spend it or assume it's a fortune. Turn it over, study it, learn what you're holding, and let the coin tell you its story. Because sometimes the most ordinary looking coin is the one that starts you on the most interesting collecting journey. Imagine finding a small golden colored dollar in an old jar of coins, turning it over in your hand, and noticing 4 simple characters that suddenly make the coin worth investigating. 2001D. At first, it doesn't look extraordinary. There is no giant date, no obvious silver shine, and no dramatic sign that you're holding something special. But the 2001D Sacagawea Dollar has a story that becomes much more interesting once you understand what happened to this series after its spectacular launch in 2000. And there is one detail about the 2001D that can completely change how a collector looks at an otherwise ordinary example. Welcome to HF Coin World. Today we're following this coin from the Denver Mint to the American collecting market. And we're going to separate the genuine collector opportunities from the exaggerated internet claims. The first thing to understand is that 2001 was only the second year of the Sacagawea Dollar series. The United States had introduced the new golden-colored dollar in 2000, with enormous promotional attention, hoping Americans would embrace a modern dollar coin for everyday use. The obverse continued to show Sacagawea carrying her infant son, a design by Glenna Goodacre, while the reverse displayed an eagle in flight surrounded by stars, designed by Thomas D. Rogers Sr. The 2001D version was struck at the Denver Mint, and PCGS records a mintage of 70,939,500 pieces. That number immediately tells us something important. This is not a coin that should be described as rare simply because it is dated. 2001. Tens of millions were produced. In ordinary circulated condition, it is generally a common modern collectible rather than a guaranteed jackpot. But now comes the part that makes the search worthwhile. Large mintage does not mean every surviving coin is equally desirable. Collectors don't simply ask how many were made. They ask how many survived in exceptional condition, how attractive they are, whether they have unusual finishes, and whether the market actually wants them. PCGS describes the regular 2001D as very common through circulated grades and into the lower mint state grades, while higher grade examples become progressively harder to find. So picture this. You find a 2001D in a box that has been sitting untouched for years. You hold it under a light and the surfaces look surprisingly clean. You turn it over and the eagle's details appear sharp. There are no obvious scratches running across the fields. Suddenly, the coin is no longer just another dollar in a box. It becomes a condition question. and condition is where the real collecting story begins. The coin itself is made from a copper-based alloy with manganese and other metals, giving it the distinctive golden appearance. It is 26.50 millimeters across, weighs 8.10 grams, and has a plain edge rather than the traditional reeded edge found on many American coins. That plain edge is worth noticing because the edge of a modern coin can sometimes tell you something that the front and back don't immediately reveal. With Sacagawea dollars, the edge is also important when collectors study unusual pieces and possible errors. Although a strange-looking edge should never automatically be called an error without proper examination. This is one of the biggest lessons in modern coin collecting. Unusual does not automatically mean rare. A scratch, dent, discoloration, counting machine mark, or post-mint alteration can make a coin look strange without making it valuable. A genuine mint error is something different, and recognized varieties or special finishes need to be identified carefully. So if you're examining your 2001D, don't rush. Turn it slowly. Look at the date. Look for the D mint mark. Study the fields around Sacagawea's portrait. Then turn the coin over and inspect the eagle. What do you see? Is the coin worn from circulation? Or does it still have the fresh appearance of an uncirculated piece? Are there contact marks across the open areas? Does the coin have original-looking luster? These questions matter because the market can treat two coins with the exact same date and mint mark very differently. Current PCGS pricing information lists ordinary 2001D examples at relatively modest levels in many mint state grades, while the values rise substantially for very high-grade coins. But even a price guide isn't a promise. A guide is a reference point, not a guaranteed selling price. Actual auction results can be lower or higher depending on grade, certification, eye appeal, timing, and buyer demand. For example, PCGS records a 2001D graded MS66 that sold for $11 in a 2008 Heritage auction, while a certified MS67 example sold for $36 in a 2014 Great Collections auction. Then there is an even more dramatic jump at the very top. A PCGS MS68 2001D sold for $197 at a Stack's Bowers auction 2013, and PCGS currently lists a $275 guide value for that grade. Those numbers tell a much more useful story than a sensational headline. The ordinary coin isn't suddenly worth hundreds of dollars. The exceptional coin can be. That distinction is everything. And here's a fascinating fact that many casual collectors don't realize. PCGS currently lists the 2001D regular issue as having an estimated survival of roughly 70.5 million examples across all grades, while its estimate for pieces grading 65 or better is about 3.5 million. In other words, the coin can be common overall while becoming considerably more interesting when you start climbing the grading scale. That's a recurring theme in modern American coin collecting. A coin doesn't have to be rare in absolute numbers to be difficult to find in truly outstanding condition. Think about how a freshly minted coin starts its life. It leaves the mint looking bright and clean. But then reality happens. Coins are transported, counted, stored, handled, dropped into bags, moved through machines, placed into rolls, and sometimes spent by ordinary Americans. Every step creates an opportunity for contact marks. That's why finding a modern coin with unusually clean surfaces can be more difficult than the mintage. Figure alone suggests, and this is where collectors develop what you might call a trained eye. A beginner may look at two 2001D dollars and see two identical coins. An experienced collector starts noticing the tiny differences, the quality of the fields, the sharpness of the strike, the number and location of contact marks, the strength of the luster, and the overall eye appeal. None of those things are obvious from a quick glance across a kitchen table. They reveal themselves when you slow down. That is exactly why the 2001D can be such an enjoyable coin to study. It is affordable enough for many collectors to encounter, but it also gives you a chance to learn how professional grading works. You begin to understand why an MS64 and an MS67 aren't simply 4 points apart. Those grades represent meaningful differences in preservation. And when you reach the highest grades, every tiny mark can matter. PCGS currently reports certified examples of the 2001D through MS68, with its population data showing far fewer pieces at that level than at lower mint state grades. Now let's step back and ask a bigger question. Why did the United States Mint create this golden dollar in the first place? The The answer isn't just about making a prettier coin. The Sacagawea dollar was intended to be a recognizable circulated dollar with a distinctive color and design. The choice of Sacagawea also gave the coin a historical identity. But despite the enormous promotional efforts surrounding the launch, the public never adopted the coin in the same way. Americans routinely use the $1 bill. PCGS notes that Sacagawea dollars are relatively uncommon in everyday circulation today and are often encountered more within collecting circles. That creates an interesting situation. The coin was made for everyday use, but its greatest modern life may be as a collectible. The 2001D therefore sits at an interesting crossroads between circulation history and numismatics. It is a real piece of modern American monetary history, but it is also an example of how the public's habits can influence the fate of a coin. And if you find one today, you are looking at an object that was produced during a period when the United States was still trying to make the new dollar familiar to the public. Now imagine another realistic discovery. Someone is going through an inherited collection after finding a small box of modern coins. There are state quarters, wheat cents, presidential dollars, and several Sacagawea dollars. At first glance, none of them seem particularly valuable. Then the collector separates the Sacagawea dollars by year. There are several 2000s, a few 2001, and some later Native American dollars. One 2001 coin has a D. The collector notices that it looks unusually clean compared with the others. Instead of immediately searching for a huge price, they photograph both sides, keep the coin untouched, and compare it with reputable references. That's the right approach. Maybe the coin turns out to be ordinary. Maybe it is an attractive mint state example. Maybe its condition makes it worth submitting for professional grading. The important thing is that the conclusion comes from evidence rather than excitement. And there is a reason experienced collectors are careful about cleaning. A coin that looks dull may tempt someone to polish it until it shines, but altering the original surface can hurt its collectible appeal. If you're examining a potentially valuable coin, the safer approach is simply to preserve it as found and seek knowledgeable evaluation. Don't turn a question mark into permanent damage. Another thing worth understanding is the difference between a normal 2001D and a special presentation or finish. PCGS lists a separate 2001D place variety in its records, and its population data shows only a small number of certified examples of that designation. This doesn't mean every shiny 2001D in a collection is automatically a proof-like coin. Again, identification matters. Lighting can make ordinary surfaces appear dramatically reflective. A truly recognized designation should be supported by appropriate examination and, when needed, professional certification. This is where the hobby becomes less about guessing and more about learning. The internet has made it incredibly easy to see spectacular coin auction results. You can find headlines about coins selling for hundreds or thousands of dollars. And those stories can be exciting. But the danger is assuming the headline applies to every example of that date. The 2001D is a perfect lesson in why that doesn't work. PCGS's auction database shows an auction record of $546 for a 2001D MS68, while more ordinary certified examples have sold for much less. The same date can therefore appear in completely different price categories depending on grade and circumstances. That's not a contradiction. That's the coin market working normally. Think of it like automobiles. Two cars can have the same model year and the same basic design, yet mileage, condition, history, and equipment can make them worth very different amounts. Coins work in a similar way. The date is only the beginning of the conversation. The mint mark tells you where it was made. The condition tells you how well it survived. The variety or error status tells you whether it has an unusual production history. And the market tells you what collectors are actually willing to pay. Once you understand those four ideas, coin hunting becomes much more intelligent. Now let's talk about what you should actually look for on a 2001D. Start with the obvious, a clear 2001 date and the D mint mark. Next, examine the surfaces. On a circulated coin, expect wear and contact marks. On an uncirculated coin, look for original luster and minimal damage. Pay special attention to the large open areas, because marks there can be especially visible. Then inspect the reverse. The eagle should have the normal design characteristics for a 2001 circulation strike. If you see something that appears unusual, don't immediately label it a rare variety. Take a clear photograph, compare it with reliable numismatic references, and look for confirmation from specialists or recognized grading services. This is especially important with modern coins because damage after leaving the mint can create countless strange-looking shapes. A machine can leave marks. Another coin can strike against it. A coin can be dropped. A chemical reaction can change its color. None of these automatically creates a valuable mint error. A genuine error is tied to the manufacturing process, and that distinction needs evidence. One of the most surprising things about the Sacagawea series is that its most famous varieties are not necessarily the ordinary Denver coins people find in circulation. The famous Cheerios prototype reverse is associated with selected 2000p coins distributed through cereal boxes, and the famous 2000p mule involved a mismatched obverse and reverse combination. Those are extraordinary pieces, but they should not be used to inflate the value of an ordinary 2001D. In fact, this is one of the easiest ways to protect yourself from misinformation. Always ask whether the famous variety actually matches your mint mark, year, and design. A rare 2000p doesn't magically turn a 2001D into a rare coin. Details matter. And that's something I want every collector watching HF Coins World to remember. The best coin hunters aren't necessarily the people who find the biggest headline. They're the people who know why the headline applies to one coin and not another. That's a much more valuable skill. Now imagine the psychology of a collector building a complete Sacagawea set. They may already have 2000p, they may have 2000D, then comes 2000D, and then 2001D. The collector isn't necessarily thinking about selling the coins tomorrow. They're thinking about completing a story. That is why a common coin can still have strong personal value to a collector. A date can be the missing piece in a collection. A particularly attractive example can replace an ordinary one. A high-grade coin can become a centerpiece, and the satisfaction of finding the right piece at the right time is part of what keeps people searching. This is why coin collecting isn't simply a hunt for money. If money were the only goal, most collectors would lose interest very quickly. The deeper attraction is discovery. Every coin gives you a reason to ask another question. Where was it made? When? Why this design? Why this composition? How many were struck? How many survived? How did the market treat it? What happened to it after it left the mint? Those questions turn a small piece of metal into a story. And the 201D has plenty of story. It arrived only 1 year after the dramatic launch of the Sacagawea Dollar. It came from the Denver Mint in a production run of more than 70 million coins. It carried the same basic golden appearance that had made the new dollar distinctive. Yet as the public's enthusiasm cooled, the coin became less familiar in everyday life. Today it is a recognizable piece of modern American numismatics, and collectors continue to pay particular attention to high-grade examples. So what is a realistic value range? The honest answer is that it depends heavily on the individual coin. A circulated 2001D generally does not command a huge premium and may be close to face value. Ordinary mint state examples can be worth modest premiums, while very high-grade certified pieces can reach much higher levels. PCGS's current guide lists the 2001D around $5 at MS63 and MS64, about $7, $8 at MS65, roughly $10, $14 at MS66, around $38 to $60 at MS67, and about $275 at MS68. Depending on the specific guide value shown. Those figures should be treated as reference estimates, not promises. The actual market can change, and a coin's certification, appearance, auction venue, and buyer interest all matter. That's why I would never tell you that every 2001D Sacagawea Dollar is worth hundreds of dollars. It simply isn't accurate. The interesting possibility is that a very high-grade example can be worth substantially more than the ordinary coin. And that is exactly why collectors examine these pieces carefully. If you happen to have one that looks exceptionally clean, professional grading may be worth considering, but only after you weigh the likely value against the grading cost. A common circulated coin usually doesn't need that expense. A potentially top-grade example is a different story. This is where patience pays. You don't have to make a decision the moment you find a coin. Put it somewhere safe, study it, compare it with references, and learn. Sometimes the best move a collector can make is no move at all. Let the excitement settle before deciding what you found. Now here's a thought that might change the way you look at your own collection. The 2001D doesn't need to be rare to be interesting. It only needs to be understood. Tens of millions were produced, but the journey from mint to collector changed every surviving coin. Some were heavily circulated. Some were protected in collections. Some were damaged. Some survived remarkably well. A few reached extraordinary grades. The market then created different levels of demand for those different survivors. That is how a common modern coin can still produce a fascinating collecting story.